So what the district has done is we have created a finance committee years ago that has met several times this year to really seek input back from the staff, as well as the finance committee team, to determine what are the priorities for our staff, what is most important to them, what do they want to communicate to the Board of Education when making decisions. And so I was a part of those meetings and listening to what the staff said. And through those meetings, what we took away is that we want to make sure that we have a competitive salary base across all positions, that we want to make sure that we have a benefits package that meets the needs of our staff members, and that we're listening and trying to prioritize making sure that our staff have what they need. So with that, we've taken that information and given the finances that we have available to us, so how much revenue we're coming in balanced with the expenditures, what can we do to our salary schedule, where can we make an impact, but yet make decisions that are sustainable, that we can make sure we can continue with for years to come, and that aren't going to put the district in a position in which we're spending down our reserves or our savings, and then we become a financially stressed district. And so taking all of that input, that's kind of where all of this developed. And the board they're continuing to think about that information, they're processing the information, and I know that they're going to make decisions that are the best to their ability based on what our staff needs. Good afternoon, Boonville staff. Last night, we hosted an informational meeting on budget, and it essentially was the same presentation that I shared with the Board of Education the prior week. So I want to just give you some highlights from that if you weren't able to attend, and if you were able to attend, this might be just helpful information that you can reflect back on. So I've got a slideshow which I will share and proceed through. However, I won't focus on some of the slides for an extended amount of time, just to keep it brief, because I don't want this presentation to take a significant amount of your time. So I'm going to go ahead and just dig right in. With public school financing, there are some important pieces that are very unique to public school that are quite different than just regular budgeting and accounting that you might have, practice in other businesses or your home. One of the pieces that we look at is our fiscal year. So in public schools in Missouri, our fiscal year begins July 1st and it runs through June 30th. And when we refer to a fiscal year, it's the year in which the budget ends. So throughout this conversation, you're going to hear me make reference to fiscal year 22 or fiscal year 23. We are currently in fiscal year 22 because we're ending the school year, the 21-22 school year, on June 30th of 22. When we look at planning for next year, the 22-23 school year, we refer to that as fiscal year 23. There are two key features with school financing that I want to make sure that I highlight with everyone because I believe it causes the greatest amount of confusion. And that is the difference between a bond fund and a tax levy. So a bond fund, which are no tax bond increases, which we ran in 2019 and 2021, are no tax increases, no property tax increases. It essentially allows the school district to continue to borrow money because we're using school debt, we're using school finances. We need permission from the voters to continue to engage in that debt. The key feature with bond funds, there's two. One, that it's one-time money, so you receive it one time. So in 2019, we received that bond fund that year. You don't get it again the next year. The only time you get that money again is if you do a new bond issue. So in 2021, based on some calculations, we were eligible for some additional money. And so we requested the voters to be able to continue to do that. Those can only be used for capital expenses and those one-time expenses. So you can't use bond funds for ongoing expenses that happen every year. You can't use it for salaries, benefits, general supplies, utilities. It has to be for capital projects, so like building. Then the other type of funding is tax levy. And we set a tax levy every year. And if you want to obtain more money every year, then you run a tax levy increase, which we did in 2019. And a tax levy increase does cause your taxes to go up, but it helps the district recoup additional money every year. So every year we're going to receive those additional funds that the tax levy increase granted. Those funds can be used for things like salaries and benefits and general supplies because it's a recurring revenue stream. We have 4 funds. I'm not going to go into those in detail, but school financing has 4 funds. And our total tax levy at our school district is $4.9149 of every $100 in assessed value. Within the 4 funds, there are limitations on how you can transfer money and what can be deposited into the funds. So we have a debt service fund in which we pay all of our debt principal and interest and fees out of. That's the only thing that can be deposited in that fund, and it's the only money that can be spent out of that. And the same for capital projects. You can only make a transfer into that, and it's capped, or you can specifically designate at the beginning of the year, but there's limitations on how you can move some of those monies around. So the budget's a living document. We make general adjustments each year, about 4 times a year. There are varying times in which we receive money. Primarily, we receive our largest portion in January when we receive tax payments. And we do our best to conservatively budget on the revenue, and then our expenditures, we tend to budget high so that we're trying to capture the best possible scenario. There are general sources of revenue, and I've listed those out on this slide. And these are not all, but kind of the primary sources of revenue that we receive. And then on this next slide are key terms. And you may hear SAT, state adequacy target, average daily attendance shared. And so this just defines those a bit more. State funding is comprised of two pieces. It is basic formula money and classroom trust fund money. And the piece that I want to make sure I share here is that classroom trust money, so we have this big pot of basic formula money, and classroom trust fund is part of that. It's not in addition, it's just part of that. And that's classroom trust fund are gaming monies. However, with like the boat in Boonville, all of those gaming receipts and all the lotteries across the state, they all go into one large pool at the state level, and then it's divided according to a calculation among all school districts evenly or equally distributed. So because we have the boat in our district, we don't receive a financial benefit from that. That money that's collected goes to the classroom trust fund and then distributed at the state level. And then there's another funding source called Prop C that is general just tax receipt, sales tax money. When we look at our fiscal year 22, our current year, and then we're looking forward to the 23 budget, we have to think about a couple of key pieces. That there's no increase to state funding, and we are a state funding formula dependent school district. That transportation funding hasn't been increased, and that there are local tax collections within our district that are slow to collect or non-collected, which negatively impact just the general overall receipt of our revenues. And then this slide just summarizes the revenues by source historically so that you can see how much money we receive locally through taxes, how much we receive at the state level through the funding formula. For this current school year, I've included some significant categories of expenditures so that you can see where is the majority of our money going. So how are we spending our money? And what you'll note is that the majority of our budget is spent on salaries and benefits. And then that's followed up through some other categories that are listed below. So this year we are on pace to spend about $21.7 million in expenditures. This is a graphic that just gives you a visual representation of what your dollar goes towards. So for every dollar that is paid into taxes, this is how the school breaks it apart and receives it. And you can see that, again, the majority goes to salaries and benefits, and then you'll see just general operation of the plant. You know, what it costs to pay our utilities, make sure that we have everything that we need to operate our school buildings, and that's the next significant portion, followed by transportation, food service, and supplies. We've already shared information about health insurance, and unfortunately we can't make any determinations about what the district will fund. Currently we fund a contribution of $450 per month. Next year the premium is going to $470.70 per month. That additional, if we were to fully fund that $470.70 for the employees, we need to budget in an additional $56,635 in expenditures at the district level to be able to absorb that cost. And then here lists out some anticipated personnel expenditures. Through retirements, we are able to make some determinations because we know we need to improve salaries across the board. And to do that, that involves how can we restructure the current personnel that we have? Because to be able to increase salaries, which is at a significant cost, we have to be able to incur some savings in other areas. So this slide shares what our proposal is for doing that. My proposed expenses or salary adjustments total about $402,000. We've been able to do, through some realignment, structure some savings of about $340,000 to make sure that that this is a feasible option for us. But as you can see, we still have some room to make some of those changes. The board's also considering how can they adjust classified salaries, because that's also a priority for them. Not only does the board really want to emphasize certificated salaries, they also want to make sure that we are addressing classified or hourly staff employee salaries. So on this slide are some proposals about here's some potential increases that we could grant, and then how much that would cost based on the number of current staff we have in those positions. This lump sum is not included in that prior slide total. So in order to do all of these options, which total $204,000, we're going to have to make adjustments in other areas to make sure that we can financially support that. The key feature with salaries, as I shared earlier, is that those are recurring costs. So when we add salary increases, we need to make sure that we can sustain that across the years. On this slide are some notable revenue and expenditure changes for the upcoming school year. On the left, I just share, here are some revenue notations that we've noted. We do the best we can when we project revenue. Right now, we still do not know exactly how much the state is going to fund for us, and we do not know how much money we'll receive federally. So we've made the projections and estimates using the best information that we have. On the right are some increased expenses that we know we will have, and these are currently budgeted into our budget. These are noted increases compared to what we've spent this year. So for instance, virtual instruction, that's going to cost us an additional $16,000 next year. And virtual instruction is MOCAP. It's a state requirement that all public school districts in Missouri have to offer MOCAP to students that would like to receive that. So again, we're making the best estimates that we can based on the information that we have available. On this slide, I just wanted to be transparent with, because maintenance consumes a large portion of our budget, I wanted just to detail out a bit more about what we're planning to do. So we have some projects on the list. One of these items, the breastfeeding spaces, is a requirement, a new requirement for school districts in Missouri to provide an appropriate space for breastfeeding mothers. And so Josh and the maintenance team are working to create those spaces in our buildings. And then the other items are a variety of repairs across the district, so that you can see Overall, it's about $275,000 in repairs or maintenance projects that we have budgeted, which is a significant improvement compared to prior years. So that maintenance custodial team has done a really nice job of creating our spaces, renovating and repairing our spaces so that they're able to reduce those overall costs. And then overall, here's our expenditure projections for the year. Again, best estimates of what we have available, broken down by various categories. We project that we will expend $20.8 million, and all of those areas are specified. And then we break down and look at revenues compared to expenditures. You can see that our projected revenue, based on our current estimates, is $20.7 million, which is less than our projected expenditures. So at the moment, we are on pace to deficit spend next year about $78,000. That does not include some additional projected expenses, such as we want to make sure we adjust that classified salary schedule. So what additional cost will that be? If we do all of those recommendations, then we need to add $204,000 to that deficit. Are we going to adjust any administrator salary changes? And then what are we going to do for custodial services? Because right now we have to contract out our night custodial services because of lack of applicants. And so all of those things are weighing into what our plans are for next year. And then the last piece I want to talk about are fund balances, and that may also be phrased as reserves or fund balances, but essentially it's kind of the savings for the district. And fund balances are important because our revenues fluctuate throughout the year. So as I shared earlier, we don't receive our tax payments until January, but we have 6 months of expenses on our fiscal year that we have to make sure we cover before January. And then also we want to make sure we have good fund balances in the event that something happens in our district, that we have a catastrophic event, or we have at the state level funding is withheld that was unanticipated. And so we want to make sure that we have a nice healthy fund balance that can sustain our district for a few months. Based on our size district and our Board of Education's goal, our goal is to maintain a fund balance between 20 and 25%. And then this slide is just a graphic representation of what our fund balances have looked like over the past 10 to 12 years. And it's kind of gone up and down a little bit. There have definitely been some years in which the district has struggled. Maybe they've had to dip into those reserves a bit more to cover some unanticipated expenses. But as you can see, compared to 2020, we're now on that trajectory more in a positive direction. So we are still within that healthy range of where we want to maintain that savings and being able to keep that savings. So if you ever have questions about finance, please feel free to email me, call me, come visit with me. If you need a further breakdown of any of these items, I am more than happy to share that with you. We want to be as transparent as possible, and knowing that it can be a bit difficult to understand, we want to try and explain it in the best way possible. So again, if you've ever got questions, don't hesitate to ask, and we'll do the best we can to answer them or find the answer for you. Thanks.